Come, spellweavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome back to Rollin Bones with Ryan Howard, where we are making old school young again. I'm your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and this evening, my good friend AlchemicRaker is back to talk about his most recent project, The Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin, which is a retro clone re-exploration of Chainmail and his thoughts on medieval and medieval fantasy wargaming. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We've also got a couple fantastic articles to talk about before that that were written by our good friend, the Basic Expert. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Before we do, want to remind everyone to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoy what you see here on Rollin Bones, that's one of the best ways to let people know what we have going on. Also want to remind everyone you can find me on various social media platforms, including X and Instagram, where I am at Howard_Ryan Gregg. YouTube is Rollin Bones. Twitch is twitch.tv/RollinBonesRyan. And Substack is rollinbones.substack.com. I have a Substack article that is going up tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Time that is about dueling, specifically pistol dueling. We will have a follow-up article sometime in the next couple weeks about melee dueling and my own interpretation of rules for doing melee duels. But pistol dueling, for those of you who like using your black powder weapons, that is the topic of the article that will be posted tomorrow at 9 a.m. It is scheduled, it is written, it is happening. So that is enough of my shilling. Let's go ahead and bring on today's guest. Once again, he is a good friend. You've seen him on the show before, one of my compatriots over in the Basic Experts Discord server. You can find him on X at AlchemicRaker, the one and only AlchemicRaker. Welcome back to Rollin Bones.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Oh, no problem, man. Welcome back. Cool. So, yeah, without further ado, let's see who we got in chat here. Authoritative News Network. He is here with us. Paladin, welcome. Jeffro Johnson, the one and only. Welcome, Jeffro. The Wonky is here. And then Tag 1080. Welcome. All right. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here for us to take a look at. The Basic Expert woke up a couple days ago and chose violence, as the kids once said. I don't know if they still say that anymore, but let's take a look at this this first article here. The OSR is cringe. Really going for the throat there. John, there's been, just to let everyone know, there's been a resurgence of nonsense on kind of the troublemakers of the OSR front. And
Yep.
This is always a weird topic for me to discuss, because when everyone in the Gilded server talks about kind of the OSR, they're thinking of one group. I'm thinking of a different group than a lot of them. So before we dig into this article, when you hear that phrase, the OSR, like, who are some of the names or people that come to mind, Raker?
I mean, when I think OSR, the first stuff that comes to mind to me is Old School Essentials, Goodman Games, DCC. I think about a lot of the indie products that get made, a lot of BX derived work. I think of Rules Light stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I go further back, I'll think of Osric and, kind of why what started the OSR.
Yeah.
And that's mostly what it means to me. And then if we go to Twitter, then there's certain people that talk about it more than others, and that applies there. But it's different faces of the OSR.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, my mind immediately goes to Frog God Games, Goodman Games, Matt Finch, uh, a lot of the guys that kind of brought me into the scene who are still kind of active in it. But there's a different side to the OSR that really has really dragged everything down. And Full Metal Dragon has mentioned uh, the pundit man, the pizza wizard here. And honestly, when it comes to just people who have poisoned that well, you've got him, and then you've got Ryan David, who have just kind of made life miserable for a lot of us over the past year, 2 years. And that's like what this article comes down to is these guys just keep coming at us. And so John kind of, did yeoman's work on this, kind of putting together the problems that we now see coming out of this scene that served its purpose in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So yeah, this article reminded me of a couple years ago, whenever I was getting back into D&D after quite a break, really, and looking at 5th edition and deciding that maybe I want, to get something a little more old school, and I found the OSR, and I found Pundit at that time, and followed him because he'd talk about it, and he sounds authoritative on the subject, and it's really easy to get pulled into the language that him and there's other channels like him that they'll use, saying, well, this is why this is better than what Wizards of the Coast is doing, right? Yep. And there's nuggets of truth in there, but that doesn't mean that it's all truth. And after some time, I started to catch on to that, and it's like, you got to be careful, even within the OSR. So, yeah, and I really like the Basic Experts article here, because he points out this stuff. I'll let you take it.
Yeah, so what John does in this article, we start off with kind of getting into the origins of the OSR, and this kind of first line of this first section after the introduction. The purpose of the OSR was originally to clone old rules and get them into the hands of modern gamers or grognards who no longer had access to them. In the mid-2000s, games like Basic Fantasy RPG and Osric filled this gap. These are not perfect one-to-one interpretations of the rules, but they at least gave people a taste of the old school way. And so, Jeffro is kind of mentioning some of these early works and early creators who kind of made that scene. So, Matt Finch, The Dungeon as a Mythic Underworld, Naked Went the Gamer, Fight On magazine. The original intention of these works was to remind people, and for anyone who doesn't know, which, if you're watching the show, you know this already and lived it. I discovered this after the fact. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of this stuff was not available. You couldn't just go on drive-through and get a PDF of AD&D First Edition, or of the Red Box, or OD&D. None of this stuff was an option. And so you had these guys who were fed up with 3.5 and 4E and the direction that they were seeing the D&D mainline products going in. And they really went to great pains, especially Matt Finch on the legal front, to see how close they could get to those original rules so that there was a sense of continuity with the old way of playing, so that, players had a resource to go back and see the original intent of these games and these rules.
Yeah, reclaim the ability to play those games that were out of print.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a worthy and laudable cause, and one that, made these guys kind of heroes of gaming at this point. And Jeff Rowe again says here, the OSR was never just clones. It was about elucidating the nature of the old TSR games and getting a better experience with them at the table. That's correct. Because at the time, this was lost knowledge. Again, these books were not available anymore. So Osric and Basic Fantasy and Swords and Wizardry and eventually OSE, these were ways to reconnect with those old rules. What happened, though, was these games were successful, a movement formed, and Wizards of the Coast was forced to basically either completely cede that side of gaming over to this group or just make their old stuff available for people to purchase. And they opted to make their old stuff available. So now, these days you can go on Drive-Thru RPG and you can get yourself everything that was ever made for AD&D First Edition, everything that was made for Basic Expert. You can get Beck Me. You can, all of it's available now. All of it's available. And right as this is happening, right as all of these games are being made available, you start to see this shift, this kind of, I'll be honest, degradation in the OSR come in, where you have these people who saw that the OSR was successful off of the backs of people who really understood the rules and really understood game design. And their ethos seemed to be, let me recreate the game I thought I was playing when I was 12 years old. And that's this mentality that a lot of the kind of latter day OSR games approach with. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the game, because the last time they opened those books and read them was when they were 12.
Well, is that restricted just to the recent, though? I was under the impression that stuff like Osric was fairly old in the OSR.
Yeah, Osric is like a lot of people say that Osric is the beginning of the OSR.
Yeah. So I haven't thoroughly studied Osric, but I have studied First Edition AD&D, which is what it's supposed to be a clone of, or what it's supposed to be a clone of. And reading through Osric, you can tell that it's already starting to do what you're describing, where this is what they were playing, but it's not necessarily what the rules of First Edition were.
Right.
And maybe they didn't think of anything of it at the time. But that certainly seems to become more and more deliberate.
Yes.
As time goes on, and only gets worse. And it's done in the name of this is the way that old school is played, instead of this is what the old games were. And so there is a difference in goal between how you might first perceive it. It's like, oh, I want to play something old, but I want it in a new layout. Then I should get this. And you're not actually going to get the old game when you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and John addresses that in the article when he says, the general OSR enjoyer worships a fake version of D&D, which has led me to calling it cringe. They love and worship the version of D&D they misunderstood when they were 12 and have not advanced in their knowledge, understanding, or skill of the game since. And what we see now that people have started to go back and read over the rules, now that we have people like the bros going through these books and kind of rereading through parts that were glossed over or misunderstood or omitted from these kind of earlier OSR texts, instead of the reaction being, oh, cool, new things to try, new ways to experience the game, or hey, that's something that I never understood. A lot of these guys screamed bloody murder.
Mm-hmm.
They went completely apoplectic because someone who and some of the guys who were doing this did have nostalgia for those old ways. A lot of them didn't. Basic Expert did not have any nostalgia tied directly to the old editions. I did not have any nostalgia tied to the old editions. When those of us who have taken a look at this stuff, we've read what people have pointed out to us to read. We've thought about the game in different ways, and we've kind of approached it as, well, if this is what's originally in the book, this is maybe what we should try. These guys don't want to acknowledge that what they remember to be correct might not have been correct ever.
Yeah. That is so demonstrably true.
Yes.
That's where I ended up. So I told you I started in the OSR, found Pundit some, and that part of the sphere likes to butt heads with exactly what you're talking about. Like, let's look at the rules and what's there. And that was probably my first exposure to the bros, and the bro OSR, where they're looking at what's actually in the rules. What does it say? Yeah. And I find that interesting. Like, I don't know what the rules mean necessarily, but they're clearly written there. And why is it now suddenly bad to read them? I thought that's what the OSR was about. I was fooled into thinking that that's what the OSR was about. Yeah. And I start to see this crack form in my own perception of what the OSR is.
Yeah.
And the bros are getting in there. It's like, well, what do the rules say? And get accounts from people back then. Read the books that Gary read, and find out more about that. Yeah. And one of those is on a search for truth, and one of those is trying to hide something. Yeah. And there's a lot of good people that play OSR games. I don't want to vilify all of them, but there are loud voices in the OSR that are trying to push that away.
Yeah.
And not have the focus on the truth. And I really don't like that. It's very distasteful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and B-Dubs is in chat right now, and he's pointing out that my rhetoric that the OSR is just a PDF shill group is too powerful. I got TBE to believe it enough to write this post and believe it enough to do a podcast about it. Thank goodness I used my powers for good. What Dubs is getting at here is what ends up happening, and what Basic Expert goes on to explain here is you have a lot of these guys who are really pushing back hard on these ideas that there's any kind of lost knowledge associated with role-playing games. Mm-hmm. They're now doing these projects where they're trying to force genres that don't fit with BX rules into BX. They're mm-hmm. trying to kind of force everything onto this this bastard version of BX, and whatever that they're whatever they're trying to do, like, whether it's a grift, whether they know they're just lying to people, or they genuinely don't understand, it is hurting the industry. And two of the worst offenders of this, actually, the worst offender of this straight up is Pundit.
Yeah.
He is a shill. He knows it's wrong. Um, he like he is the turd clinging to the toilet bowl in this industry. Um, and he is the most vocal and the most acerbic about all of this. He is the one who weaponizes the culture war, as TB points out here. He's the one who tries to shut down all the conversation, and he's the one who like tries to stir up mobs against people when they commit the crimes of talking to Jeffro or talking to B-dubs or stuff like that. All of this kind of swirls around this man's inability to just let his ego go.
Yeah. I mean, like there's so much evidence of hypocrisy coming out of Pundit, right? I know that's been even compiled into video. It's in this article even. And there's others like that. That I'm not sure if this article really covers all of them, but don't need to. It is a grift. It is. Yeah. They're trying to control narrative around it, and they're writing. People like to get worked up and get tribal about things, and they figured out that, hey, they can clone BX again, and they can slap a new setting on it. Copy something from history, copy something from popular video game or something, and ship it back out there and remind everybody that your side's right. And you'll sell some more PDFs. I think that's absolutely correct. And we can see that happening. And even as we go further on in here, we see that happening with what's it called? Not inappropriate characters. The other one, is that Nerd Cognito?
Nerd Cognito. Oh, yeah. Nerd Cognito.
And Nerd Cognito's doing stuff like that as well. Is claiming they've been banned off YouTube and stuff like that. And there's a certain way that your channel looks like. You get a message that's unique to whenever it's being banned, and there's a different look whenever you go to a channel that's been deleted, and that channel's been deleted, not banned. But when I asked about this, because I was like, is there something I don't know here? It looks like it's been deleted. Get blocked. So I mean, that certainly smells like guilt to me. So that it is a grift, and it's a grift, and they maintain this facade that they're the preservers of what old school is, and I don't like that about it. There's some really cool stuff that the OSR has made, but then there's this stuff that this is what the news about the OSR is, and I don't like that at all.
And there's two articles here, and so we'll get into some of the good stuff that the OSR has done with the other article, because a lot of that stuff is still ongoing, and a lot of those guys that have done it are still doing it. But what you have with these particular bad actors that we've been talking about, and John goes into the details of all the stuff that they put him through, and they put Crossface through, and they put Vic through. But what it ultimately comes down to is everything that the self-described OSR folks do is exactly what the 5e people do, or exactly what they accuse the 5e only people of do. They try to put everything in the same box. They try to put everything in the BX box instead of the 5e box. They worship at the altar of Rule Zero,
Hmm.
and everything is just kind of like based around uh, nostalgia and scoring points in this just completely cringe culture war
Hmm.
that everyone keeps pushing through. um yeah, like, honestly.
Yeah. So so the OSR uh, is in the rut with BX,
Hmm.
right? All the majority of people in the OSR, what they really like is this BX format, and the in the same kind of indie scene, or homebrew making PDF scene
Yep.
with 5e, is very much the same way, but it's with 5th edition D&D. But
Yep.
they're doing the exact same thing.
Hmm.
So many of these people, uh, their only exposure to TTRPGs, or fantasy TTRPGs at least, is D&D, and they don't they don't know why mechanics exist in the first place. And then what mechanics they do understand are only BX and only 5th edition.
Yep.
Um, and so when they innovate, they're all doing basically the same thing.
Yes.
Um, so there's not new stuff coming out of it,
Hmm.
and they're not going back further to discover, well, was there anything else that we might tap into back there?
Right.
They're not doing any of that.
Hmm.
And so it's a creative dead end in that sense, that there could be new ways to play D&D. There could be ways to play D&D that aren't in the book that you keep copying. And right now we're at two of these clones, and two of these baselines, and just clones of those and clones of those, and it it's why people are getting bored of it and
Yeah.
moving on, because and I think that's why they where like the Heartbreaker comes from,
Yeah.
the fantasy Heartbreaker,
Hmm.
is because it's another BX clone. It's
Yeah.
another BX clone. I already know this. Everyone knows this. You know it whenever you open the pages and like, okay, this is another Heartbreaker.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and they've come to certain conclusions that they hold up. Um, I think it talks about Rule Zero in here. That Rule Zero is what makes something old school.
Yeah.
Uh, and well, we've had shows about that.
Yeah.
You've had shows about that. The
Yeah. Rule Zero is
Rule Zero
awful.
might very well define the OSR, but it's not what makes something old school.
Yeah.
Um, and being very deadly, and mudcore and that kind of stuff. Uh,
Hmm.
that's what old school is. Well, that's not true either.
Right.
And I'll actually talk about that in a bit. Is this idea that, well, uh, if you just play old school by the rules, right? Because the step above Rule Zero story gaming is, well, let's play by the rules of the game. What's in the rules? And
Yeah.
there's actually a game to play there, and suddenly a path to mastery exists.
Yes.
Once you have something to codify it,
Yeah.
um, then you're getting somewhere.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, this article, and this is not an indictment of the basic expert, because I love him and he's a great guy, and that's a great article. For me, reading this article was tiresome because I lived it. I experienced it. I
Mhm.
I was there for a lot of this stuff that happened. I'm going to drop it in chat for you guys to read. It's called "The OSR is Cringe," and I encourage each of you to read it in your time and kind of let it sit in your thoughts. But um, I do want to shift over to the other article that he wrote, and in doing so, as part of um, this kind of shifting tracks here, um, I do want to highlight some of the people who work within the OSR scene that are doing good work that's not just doing what Jonathan Frost mentions here, the kind of multiplicity thing of cloning clones. If any of you have not seen that movie, it's a great Michael Keaton comedy where at some point two clones get a clone made of themselves, and that clone is very special indeed. But hilarious movie, definitely worth a watch. But when I think of people who are doing interesting things that still work within the realm of the OSR, I think of people like Levi Combs, good friend of mine. Levi is taking these rules and these tools that the old school framework provides and doing some truly innovative and bizarre things. Levi has just this chaotic imagination that is unleashed on every single page that he writes. When you read his stuff, the mechanics are familiar, but they are never just the same beats over and over again. I also think of people like Jeff Talanian, who has taken the very basic framework of BX and turned it into Hyperborea, which is its own kind of unique ecosystem designed to allow people to run stuff in the worlds of Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I think of are people. There's no way to say this without sounding vain. What Wonky and I are trying to do is take the lessons that we learned from the good parts of the OSR and turn it into something new. Because the thing that we've said over and over again is whatever we do, we're two guys in our 20s. It can't be old. It has to be new. So that's what we're trying to carry forward. And that leads us into this article about how to improve old school gaming, where really there's two basic rules that that John lays out in this companion article to the first one. The first is actually learn the rules. Stop promoting rule zero to new game masters. You need to actually read the books that you say that you're running with. You need to understand the way that the rules are structured, how the game is supposed to function.
Mm-hmm.
And only once you have a functional mastery of the rules, then are you essentially given license to make rulings, because you have mastered and internalized the mechanics of the game that you are running. So what are your thoughts on that, Raker?
I agree with that very much. The rule zero is very much a stumbling block, and it plagues the OSR, and it obviously plagues 5e. So Kriegspiel, and some other stuff I'll talk about later actually, is like this pinnacle of what you might be able to do, where we don't necessarily have to codify rules if we've got someone who understands stuff so well that we can trust them to put the correct probabilities on stuff. And what that frees the players up to do is fully play their role. And they're going to make the decisions that they want to make as players, and trust that the referee can handle it just like with the best possible game rules that apply. That's a lot of trust that you have to put on the referee, and that requires a lot of skill of the referee at that point. So you don't want to, a new game master doesn't have that ability. And someone who has only ever played BX doesn't have that ability. Someone who's only ever played 5th edition doesn't have that ability because their understanding of the rules is still so limited. So you need to run one system, and you need to learn other systems, and you need to have like this repertoire of understanding of, well, here's different mechanics. These are tools available
Yep.
that I can apply to say, well, the players are trying to do some like, economic stuff against each other. That how am I going to do that?
Yeah.
And so then not only do you have to have some mechanical understanding of stuff, uh, you also like need to read and learn these things yourself so that you can properly like know what kind of mechanic to match them up to in the first place.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of power. And you want to say to this really talented referee, look, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do that to make the game as great as it can be. But you tell that same thing to someone who doesn't know any of that. They're just coming in, and you say, well, you can just do whatever you want. That's a completely different message.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you're going to get completely different results.
Yep.
Especially if you go in saying, well, it's about the story. Okay, well, you've just like burn it all. It's done. Like whatever it meant, whatever Rule 0 was supposed to mean in the first place, you don't have a bit of that left in what you're telling people now. It's a real perversion of what the concept was.
Yep. Yeah, and this is Tag 1080 also makes a good point here about even beyond learning the rules of your game. You need to learn the rules of life, the rules of social interaction. Jeffro is always going to say take dance lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Tag says wrestling, and Crossface also recommends grappling to learn these situations. I found that cooking is a very useful way to pick up some of this stuff, but you need to understand social situations and how to operate within them and how to deal with people and be a likable person, how to win friends and influence people. Maybe you should read Dale Carnegie as well as Gary Gygax. It wouldn't hurt. But the other rule that you have here, presented by the basic expert, and this one's underrated, honestly. I went right past it. Stop encouraging political activism in the hobby.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one that's hard to swallow, even for people on like quote unquote our side. A lot of us just, as Crossface likes to say, just want to grill and game. But there is this temptation when we see the people that we all dislike, the people that we've all kind of written off as hopeless at this point, just shoehorning whatever issue of the day they want in their games. The rest of us, we don't want to see the other side of that. We don't want to hear about how like Uber based whatever the races of your world are. We just want a game that's fun and usable and lets all of us just kind of relax for a little bit. Like like Jonathan Frost said, this should be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jeffro again points out let's talk about Mexican orcs for 2 hours. I have not told the story on the show before, because again, Double D Diversity and Dragons is a good friend of mine. He's a friend of the show. He was kind enough to have me on the show to promote my Kickstarter with Wonky. And Victor Gorchev was on there too. But over the course of Wonky and Vic and I talking about Guts and Glory and Modern Necessities and the projects we were working on to take these old school ideas that we were influenced by forward into new products, some guy in chat popped up. I just saw it out of the corner of my eye, and it shot like a spark of rage through my chest. Some guy said, "When are you guys going to talk about the combat wheelchair?" If that person had been in front of me, I would have smacked them. We're talking about game design. We're
Yeah.
talking about ways that we have been influenced by games that have come before, and we're talking about kind of carrying forward the torch of old school gaming. We're talking about actually having fun and God forbid playing games for a little bit. And you want to talk about the stupid combat wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
that we've all talked about forever. This was like the third iteration of the wheelchair discourse, but rando culture war addict was
Yeah, it's one of the least interesting things going on right now, and
yeah.
you want to bring that up again?
And
Like,
and Jeffrey was taking me to task for it. I said this could have been the first RPG show in history that didn't mention the combat wheelchair, and I blew it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. We could have.
yeah, we've got to go back.
Yeah.
We need to go back. The OSR is short-sighted the same way that fifth edition is short-sighted, and wherever it's going next it's evidently short-sighted based on the previews they've given of it. You know what they're going to do. It's not a surprise to anyone. You can go onto their forums and read about it and get mad about it. They're still going to do it, and what you need to do is not give them your money, and then eventually either they'll stop doing it or someone else will come along who wants your money. You know, you don't have to spend all day getting enraged about it. And
Yep.
there are some people that just like doing that, but
and this is
it doesn't have to be about that.
This is my sincere plea. I'm going to leave aside the creators at this point.
Yeah.
You guys have all heard me complain about the way that Professor Dungeon Master kind of structures his videos now and the clickbait. You've heard me talk about how I don't like the culture war. I'm going to leave aside the creators who need, like, a lot of them say the reason why they keep going back to these topics or these are the topics that get traction. Professor Dungeon Master has said that over and over again. He makes videos with titles that make it sound like Matt Mercer has set fire to an orphanage or something, because that's what people click on. And when he makes videos that are about other topics, people just tune out. So this is my sincere plea to all of you out there who watch shows like that, who go on Twitter, who have been in this culture war for 20 years at this point now. It's been that long. Guys, leave it all alone. Just cut yourself off from it. Do not engage with it anymore. You guys are the ones that are driving this forward, and I don't want to preach at people. I don't want to make people feel like I'm crapping on them, but don't feed this. All you're doing is hurting yourself. All you're doing is making yourself angry. You're just clicking on the thing that's going to continue giving you that rage high. Stop doing that. Look for the interesting things. Look for the people who are actually trying to create parallel culture. You are the ones feeding the algorithm to make this content what it is. Don't do that anymore. Don't play the rage game anymore. As Rex Teal says here, say no to drugs, kids.
Yeah.
And Malachi mentions the black pill. Yeah, that's what you're doing. You are hooking yourself up to the you're hooking yourself up to the black pill IV at that point. Man, this is like the power is in your hands, ladies and gentlemen who are watching this show. If you don't like what the algorithm is serving up, start watching other things. Change it.
Yeah, be the change. Yeah,
Yeah. Detox.
absolutely. Well, you know what? Let's detox and go all the way back.
Yeah, absolutely. Because on the subject of knowing the rules and being uh, literate, as Tag is saying here, what's better than combat wheelchairs? What's better than the black pill suppository that so many of you have ingested? A version of Chainmail that is actually readable, and that, of course, brings us to Raker's new project here, The Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin, a re-examination of Chainmail, a collection of rules for medieval war games by AlchemicRaker. Raker, what am I looking at here? What is The Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin, your elevator pitch for the people who are watching this show tonight?
The Old Lords of Wonder, uh, or the Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin, is Chainmail as far as OD&D is concerned, is how I like to phrase that. It has a high focus on accuracy to the original rules of Chainmail. So if you're interested in like, well, I wonder about Chainmail, but I'm not really interested in fantasy stuff, the rules are all there. It's you will not be upset about like, oh, you know, this is my homebrew interpretation of something. It's the retro clone that you want it to be.
Yep.
And if you are interested in the fantasy aspect of it, you're very likely coming from the D&D background.
Yep.
And the original fantasy section of Chainmail was not completely compatible with OD&D. Original D&D references it a lot, but there are points in original Dungeons and Dragons that clearly conflict with it, and I mean clearly. Like Chainmail says something has 12 hit dice, and OD&D says it has 8. Well, then I put 8 in Chainmail, so that whenever you use the Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin at your table, it is ready to be used with original Dungeons and Dragons, and probably even with first edition AD&D right out of the box. So that is the elevator pitch of it. But the issue with Chainmail that I've found and that I've experienced, and I expect most people have experienced, is that we're not quite sure what it is, but we probably don't need it.
Yeah.
Right? So I do want to ask you, like, what do you think Chainmail is?
So, my understanding of Chainmail, and if I get this wrong, I know there are multiple of you who are going to crucify me. My understanding of Chainmail is that it was the Gygax and now I'm completely blanking on the
Jeff Perrin?
yeah, Jeff Perrin. It was Gygax and Perrin's mass combat war game rules focused on medieval combat at first, with fantasy elements added in, so that you could use units like orcs, dragons, etc. in your medieval war games.
Mm-hmm. And continuing on that, if you had original Dungeons and Dragons, why would you want, like, what's Chainmail supposed to add in there? Like what
Right.
um like what do you imagine Chainmail adding to original Dungeons and Dragons?
I mean, just based on kind of the way that I think about D&D, I imagine chainmail as being kind of the necessary element once essentially combat reaches a different level of abstraction. Once you go from individual adventures up to the army scale, that's when you need chainmail to understand how your combats are going to scale up, to kind of ascend to the next level of role play.
Right. And so exactly. And that's what my perception of Chainmail was as well, is that, you know, it's this part of original Dungeons and Dragons where if you didn't play with big armies, then you didn't need Chainmail,
Mhm.
right? That was always my perception as well. And uh, I was working on a separate project, and I wanted to go back and I wanted to look at Chainmail and I wanted to look at a couple of other things and try to compile them. And what I discovered when I was going through Chainmail is that it was a lot more important to original Dungeons and Dragons than I had ever thought before. And that saying that it was only for mass combat was misrepresenting it and making it this very small thing compared to the role that it plays. And since then, I've been able to use the rules of Chainmail and the rules of the Old Lords, which I feel very comfortable saying that if you're playing by the rules of the Old Lords, you are playing Chainmail as far as OD&D is concerned. And that's why I made it that goal, is that I want people to be able to use it confidently like that.
Yep.
So Chainmail, you were right. These were rules that were developed at the Lake Geneva Tactical Studies Association. They really liked these the medieval wargaming rules that they were developing there. And something that was unique about those rules is that they included these rules for siege warfare in there. You can look into the history of it, but adding in this idea of you're going to siege a castle or something was novel at the time, right? So that was folded into Chainmail. So that's something specific that Chainmail features. The fantasy combat that we imagined being in there was tacked on at the end and didn't have as much of an iteration cycle as all the rest of it, and actually got it quite a lot of flack once it was released. But obviously, it turned into D&D eventually, and we all really liked that. And looking at Chainmail, you see a lot of the things that eventually get inherited into D&D, like the idea of alignments, was very important in the fantasy portion of Chainmail, of law and chaos and the war between them. And heroes appear in there. In fantasy combat is here's a hero that's going to fight on the battlefield. And the idea of measuring the strength of a hero by their hit dice. And that's by the number of men that they fight as. And we see that in the rule books of original Dungeons and Dragons. And if you're someone who's played original Dungeons and Dragons before, you probably haven't used Chainmail, and you've probably completely discarded that portion of the class section. There's not much written about the classes, and there's this table that features here's the fighting capability of each class, and that only makes sense whenever you have Chainmail. So you're level 4 fighter, and it says fights as 4 men. You can imagine that as you're playing 5th edition and your fighter gets 4 attacks. So you compare that, and the original Dungeons and Dragons fighters getting that power at 4th level. That's crazy. Like how fast they are getting strong. And all of that traces back to Chainmail. So I was seeing all of that. I'm like, okay, I want to see. I want to discover that. I want to experience that, and other people can explore it as well. So I quit my previous project. And I'm just going to focus on Chainmail, and that's what became the Old Lords. So it's got a superior layout. We can go through it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think page 6. We can look at the ranged combat rules.
There we go.
All of the layout. It's if you've played 5th edition, you know that they have a pretty good layout in their books. Tried to keep it clean to the point. There are vagaries in Chainmail, a lot more vagaries than you might imagine a war game to have, and that works to the benefit of someone running a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. You really don't care about squaring off your units whenever you're trying to run a battle in the background of the heroes doing something. Chainmail doesn't tell you any of that. It's like these are a lot of edge cases that would bug someone who's just a war gamer.
Right.
But I'm not a war gamer. I am coming at this from the tabletop role-playing perspective, and what is it bringing here? And in that sense, Chainmail is written for me. Chainmail is written for us referees, for us dungeon masters.
Yeah.
And I love that. Can we skip ahead to page 8 where it's talking about
Absolutely, we
melee?
can.
So this is one of the biggest misconceptions about Chainmail, and what has made the most impact on me playing original Dungeons and Dragons is, and D&D in general at this point really, is Chainmail was written, and it says at the intro, it was written for using figures that are 1 to 20 scale. So one figure is supposed to be 20 men, and if that figure dies, then 20 men died. And the Old Lords is written at 1 to 10 scale. And that's actually another scale that's included in Chainmail. Chainmail was written for 40 millimeter figures, and it says that if you're going to use 25 millimeter figures, then that's 1 to 10 scale. And everything else in the book is the same. And since a lot of people have 25 millimeter figures, that's what the Old Lord uses by default here. So you're measuring stuff in inches. Well, one figure is 1 inch. It just all works out, and it's a bit easier to work with. So, so you think about it as mass combat, and all of these rules do work for mass combat. But there's a hidden feature in here that if you've played first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you've already seen this ability where movement's measured in inches, and then the scale changes depending on whether or not you're indoor or outdoor. So if you're outdoor, an inch is 10 yards. And if you're indoor or underground or something, 1 inch is 10 feet. And everything scales like that, and it all just magically works. That's part of Chainmail. That's part of Chainmail, and that's part of how original Dungeons and Dragons used Chainmail. And one other thing that scales when you do that is if you're an outdoor scale at the 1 to 10, you can use 1-to-1 scale figures while you're outdoors. So you can have a party of adventurers using the Chainmail rules and say, well, we've got 10 guards with us. Chainmail doesn't actually care whether or not those figures are 10 men or 1 man apiece. So you can already start to see a little bit how you might just apply these rules then as well. Or I was running a game just this last week where the party hired 9 men-at-arms, and they were going to help them as they traipsed through the forest, and they ran into bandits, and they actually ended up needing them. And instead of having to handle these 9 different men-at-arms individually, these mass combat rules that are in Chainmail worked perfectly fine to handle these 9 men-at-arms that were with the players. And since they all have the same stats, they all resolve at once. The complexity in Chainmail comes from units instead of figures. So 9 men-at-arms are a unit. So as much time as it takes a player to play, you can resolve all the NPCs at once. And it was amazing. I was like, all right, well, you're going to roll 5d6s, and they're going to kill the bandits on rolls of 5 or a 6. And it was their first time playing it, their first combat in original Dungeons and Dragons, and it was so easy. It was so easy playing the game whenever the Chainmail rules were included. That would have been a big pain rolling, the d20s. It just folds in so well, just with the melee rules, which is what a lot of people think about. Whenever they look at Chainmail. And I know I'm going on about this. Do you have any questions about it so far?
No. So it all kind of makes sense. The way that you're describing this. And Tag 1080 makes a good point here that you're bringing forward things that are written parenthetically or kind of written in odd places and really bringing them to the forefront so that you get a full understanding. I've heard you and others say, I believe it was you actually posted the meme that said there's no such thing as high Gygaxian, you're just illiterate. Um, but
Yeah.
the one thing that I will say about the way that Gygax writes, yes, it's all there, it's all present, it's not well organized, and especially it gets lost in whatever passed for a formatting tool in 1974. Um, so, uh, as people have pointed out, okay, yeah, Gygax was not writing in some kind of
Mm-hmm.
forgotten language, or he wasn't writing in Pig Latin. Both you and Jeffro and others have made great pains to point out it's not actually as hard as people make it sound. It's just a little disorganized, and so you've done a good service by reorganizing these rules and getting people to understand. Okay, when you actually put this in order, um, yes, the system makes sense, and it's a shame that we
Mm-hmm.
weren't. It's a shame that we weren't actually, following this, and that we didn't take the time to parse this ourselves.
Yeah, and that is very true. Like I maintain that there's not really high Gygaxian, but the organization of Chainmail is awful, and the organization of first edition AD&D is it's really rough,
Yeah.
right? Because uh, to get one concept, you have to go to 3 or 4 places, and you just have to know they exist.
Yes.
And that's rough, and that's something that I have tried very hard to address in this book. Numbers that would have come from a dozen different pages, they are all in that table at the bottom of the page,
Yep.
right there. And that table didn't even exist in the original. Um, one, that was actually 6 different tables, and they weren't tables; they were actually bullet points.
Mm.
So it. But this is actually something that you would use at the tables. Like, here's who's attacking, here's what they're attacking, here's how many dice to roll, and here's what hits. It's all
Mm.
there. And then in parentheses next to the names, we have the troop classes, which is troop morale, which you need for something else. But that's on the same page too. It's not evident from how you're displaying it here, but all of these like ranged combat and melee combat, they're on 2-page spreads,
Mm.
which has like everything that you'd need there for it.
Yep.
So I can show man-to-man combat here, and everything that you need for man-to-man combat is right on this 2-page spread.
Mm.
Instead of being scattered everywhere, there's the little examples in the boxes there. All of these examples show how to use the rules, and they're examples of situations that would come up in D&D. Like,
Yep.
I could imagine this happening. My adventuring party, is doing this stuff, and here's how I can resolve it with Chainmail. It's just a couple of rolls,
Yep.
and
To zoom in for people to see here,
mhm,
the 240 heavy footer charged by 160 light horse. That's what Raker's referring to there.
mhm. And it tells, here's the numbers abstracted. The melee has a specific number of actual figures. Lay it out. One other big issue with Chainmail was that with the few examples he gave, they are still not very clear.
Yep.
They're still they're still ambiguous, and you don't understand it until you've just combed the whole thing. It's like, okay, there's only one way to interpret this ambiguous example, and
Mm.
that has to be what's true. And I've tried to be in these examples that it's going to show you everything about it. So I'm going to step through it. Here's how this post melee morale rules work,
Yep.
which is very unclear in Chainmail. If you're just trying to figure it out for the first time. And for those of you looking here and saying, well, I don't want to do 4 steps of math whenever I'm running D&D just for some men-at-arms that are tagging along with the players, you don't actually have to do this math whenever it's at that small of a scale and you've got player characters leading them.
Yep.
You roll 2d6 against a morale target, just like actually if you scroll down, the morale for excess casualties, That's the table that gets used whenever your group's taken too much damages. Roll 2d6 to see if they lose morale, or if you kill the leader, then you have to do the same kind of check.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Wonky is asking the $1 million question here. He says, I'm 100% getting a group together for this game. When can I back it on Kickstarter? This game is actually not on Kickstarter. Raker, where can people get their hands on the Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin?
This is on Drive-Thru RPG right now as a pay-what-you-want PDF. And you can support it just by spreading the word about it. If you don't want to throw any money at it, it is free. This is a retro clone of the original Chainmail game, and the rules in this are so amazing that I want people to have it. I want people to see it, and I want them to see it organized, right? So they can use it at the table, because I believe that this is amazingly usable, and that this can enhance anyone playing original Dungeons and Dragons. So I really want people to see that and explore what else can be found in here. Because I was accurate even about things that weren't to my preference, right? Like if you want to know how I'm going to house rule this game, it's not in here. This is the original game. There is not a print version of this available yet. That is in progress right now, and I'm going to be printing that through Lulu, so it'll be a nice quality print on demand thing like this. This was a proof copy. I've got some other proofs coming in, so that's going to be about maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and print on demand copies will be $10 is what I'm planning on putting those as, and that'll actually be a way to support me if you want to have a nice copy of this to use at your table. Then that also supports me in doing this.
And I think Wonky wants to make some battle reports using the Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin. Is that something that he could do?
Oh, absolutely. It's really cool watching this. Chainmail is so heroic. It's so cool. It was made for D&D, and just the more I explore Chainmail and explore the idea of using it with D&D, these battles that happen in Chainmail, they don't drag on forever. They resolve really fast. Using the post melee morale rules, you'll do that maybe once or twice in a big battle, right? Because the troops will meet up, and one side or the other will be the clear winner, and the other one is going to want to retreat. And if you win really strongly, then the other side will be routed, or they'll lose formation and retreat. And so there's only 1 or 2 rounds of melee in a lot of these battles. So they resolve very quickly, and it's what you want when you're running D&D, right?
Yeah.
But even when you put player characters in charge, how are you mixing D&D heroes in the combat here? Let's see what page that's on. Man-to-man combat is on page 12. This is what most people think about when they think about using Chainmail in D&D. This is true, but it's not really for player characters. This is actually meant for those men-at-arms that are tagging along. This man-to-man combat was added because I mentioned that Chainmail added siege rules to war games, and that was really novel. But in a siege, one person climbing to the top of a ladder to try and get to the gate, that single person matters. And so Chainmail added rules so that you can have that guy try to break through the ranks at the top of the wall. And that's what these rules are for. These are for whenever there's that individual on the battlefield, whenever there's that normal soldier that has the chance to shine. And these man-to-man combat rules are for that. And people think, well, but I can use the alternate combat system, and that replaces this. Where you're rolling a d20, And I see why they say that, because that's what I thought, and that's actually wrong. The D20 roll actually replaces heroic combat, not man-to-man combat. And heroic combat is on page 24. And this is how fantastic creatures fight against each other. So you have a dragon fighting a hero. We see there that they have to roll a 5. So the dragon rolled 2d6, and if they can beat a 5, then they defeat the hero. That's how fantasy combat was handled in Chainmail. And it's really interesting in this table because that means that certain creatures can be better against other creatures, and it's not just this totally linear thing the way that rolling against an AC is in Dungeons and Dragons is now. Where, it doesn't matter if you're a fire demon, you're going to have the same chance to hit the tree as anyone else, and that's not quite accurate, but it's captured in this fantasy combat. But this table includes heroes and superheroes, which are like lords and stuff, right? And it's not very granular, and maybe levels 1 through 7 should feel different than just, well, you're a hero still. So that's what the alternative combat system in D&D is. It's here's your chance to hit monsters at level 1, 2, 3, and so on. And it's that specific subset of the fantasy table that the D20 alternate combat system replaces. So using that and understanding that that's fantasy combat, and then having Chainmail there in the background for everything else, is clearly how OD&D was designed. And it really works. Now, I have added a couple of things in here that I think will interest people that want to use this in D&D in page 11.
Back up to page 11.
And this is the rules for heroic individuals. And this is a combination of the hero, which is from Chainmail, commanders, which are in Chainmail, even like the base rules, not the fantasy rules. It turns out that commanders share some traits with heroes, where like if a commander dies, then you have to check morale and things like that. So I've collected all of those rules onto this page, and this is how you can use your heroes from D&D and like fully map them into Chainmail. And it explains how what does it mean if you're fighting as 3 men. That's all explained here. And if you want to be really crazy and say, well, I don't want to use the alternative combat system in D&D, maybe you want to play original D&D, but you don't want to use the alternative combat, you want to go full Chainmail for that whole full experience. The table that's on the right here with the monster types and the armor categories, that's all you need. All of those are from book 2 of OD&D, and so you can play with the man-to-man combat rules, and just using Chainmail. So that's an option too, and there's examples on how to do that there as well. And there's people that are really interested in using the man-to-man combat rules, even though what I've just explained is that they were meant to replace fantasy combat. If you've got 2 heroes fighting each other, those are on even footing. So then you could use man-to-man combat rules. So I explain how to do that here too. So I've tried to provide all of those options with my best understanding of how Chainmail works. And yeah, so I hope that people are able to have fun with this. I also really highly recommend using this with Whitebox. That's from the Basic Expert. And Whitebox is your free OD&D clone that looks to Chainmail for answers, right? So I've been playing these together, and it works great together. And yeah.
Sweet. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, we've got a couple comments that I just kind of saved throughout the course of the conversation that I wanted to circle back to because I wanted you to kind of lay this out for everyone.
Sure.
But once again, to remind everyone, this is the Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin. I will put the link to drive through in the pinned comment underneath this video. And let's take a look at some of these comments here. Jeffro Johnson, I don't get why Griff said to throw Chainmail into the trash. Griff said that because Dave Arneson had nothing to do with Chainmail. I think it's that simple.
Yep.
And Griff's a goofball. So Patty's Parlor wants to know if you're running it through Basic Expert server at all.
I am not. I am trying to organize some campaigns in person currently. And if that goes well as like a foundation, I am interested in bringing it online to make that even bigger. But I want to see how that goes first.
Patty says, I'm above the circle back boy. I'm definitely a revisit great ideas guy. All right. If you say so, man. B-Dubs had an interesting comment here. He said, men of goodwill who enjoy TTRPGs can make a bigger impact by creating game worlds with John Carter and 3 hearts and 3 lions value than whining about Mexican orcs. 100%. That's what we're here to do. We, those of us who are thinking seriously about what we're going to do, especially in light in light of what we're looking at down the road with 6E. 6E is about ready to like hit the iceberg at this point, whatever, or 5.5, whatever you want to call it. D&D is about to hit the iceberg. The hobby's about to shrink. It's going to contract. That's going to leave a lot of people in kind of an awkward position. Those of us who have been kind of riding on the gravy train associated with the popularity of the hobby. When people aren't talking about role playing, even complaining about the bad stuff, what are some of these people gonna do? And so that's why so many of us are thinking, how do we carry this forward? Where do we go from here? And then Patty's Parlor had another post here that I wanted to bring up. He said, people still love South Park. This is on the subject of kind of mentioning current events or politics or, basically news of the world within a game world. People still love South Park. They love making modules that are like South Park parodies of things. It's not about my message so much about the joke and being able to make a game of it. And I think that is kind of the dividing line between, are you preaching or are you making fun of people who are being goofy? And yeah, there's definitely room for that. There's room for if people want to kind of laugh at the buffoonishness of the world, there's room for that without it turning into political diatribe. And that's, I think, what we all want to avoid is suddenly your D&D game becomes lecture time. That's the worst case scenario. If it's funny, if it's enjoyable, and even if it's thought provoking, I think it has a place. But it, as long as it's not the soapbox.
Well, yeah, it's like comedians. Like we need to be able to laugh at things, right?
Yeah.
And if people are there because they want to laugh at this or that, then that's perfectly fine. But you don't bake it into someone else's product, and slip it in because you really want to stick it to the people that you think are wrong. That's very different things.
Yep. And then Patty also wants to know, does the Old Lords adapt well to Napoleonic's modern sci-fi or post-apocalyptic battles?
So geez, I hesitate to talk about this because I am not the wargaming expert. I would say there's probably better stuff that exists currently. Maybe Napoleonics would fit in here. It has rules for gunpowder weapons in it. It has cannons. It has arquebus weapons, and there's unique rules for these different kinds of things. But what you've actually touched on is what my original project was to make a system starting with Chainmail and adding like these different errors and stuff on top of it. So yeah, that's in my sights.
The problem, and this is something that AlchemicRaker actually brought up in one of his videos when he was talking about magic as machine guns in the context of mass combat. The problem that you run into is Chainmail. It's very clearly designed for the medieval style of battle, and as weaponry advances to a certain point, these kinds of like tactics start to disappear. You don't have as many like mass army battles. Once you get into essentially like World War, even like the end of the Civil War, heading into the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, you start to have more squad-based combat, and so it's not so much like large skirmishes as much as it's you now have multiple fire teams, multiple squads of 5 people running around in a certain area, kind of engaging one-on-one with each other or two-on-one with each other. So it's not you're not going to end up with these kind of like grand scale battles.
Yeah. It's kind of like the difference between playing D&D and Chainmail. They operate differently. And so if you think the people who use D&D and they say, well, just run it at scale, right? So this figure is going to be 20 men, and I'm going to use the rules for D&D for this mass combat. But you're missing out on the mass combat rules, which is that you have to move things as units, and your strategy changes once you start thinking on that scale for this type of for this era of play, and you're missing all of that if you just hand wave over it. And exactly what you touched on is that you stopped seeing these mass formations of units that you're seeing in the early medieval, which is what Chainmail is, and when you start getting modern and futuristic, you have these little squads. And I was seeing that as well when I was looking at Chainmail. And I guess this is a little preview of where my mind is when I was looking at it, is I was looking at Battletech. I know Battletech's mainly about these mechs fighting, but there's rules for these modern infantry squads in there. And they're handled as single figures, which represent a unit of up to 30 men. And what's interesting about Battletech and why you might want to look into that is that Battletech derives from Traveler, which then traces back to Chainmail and OD&D. So there's an interesting compatibility that you'll see there whenever you start looking at how ranged combat works.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the direction I was thinking as well.
Gotcha. Well, unfortunately, we are kind of running up against our time here tonight. It's always great to have you on the show, man. It won't be so long between this appearance and your next one, because I enjoy having you on and I enjoy talking with you, and you always bring good things to the conversation. So we'll do this again sometime very soon.
Well, I appreciate it. I love being on here, and yeah, we'll have to talk again soon. I know that there's more that that we didn't even get to today. So I look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, guys, that's going to be it for Rollin Bones this evening. Coming up in August, I'm going to be putting something together with Black Lodge Games. I need to verify the date with them to make sure that we're good to go, but I'll have them on to talk about Shucked Oyster. And something that I want to go ahead and promote right now, because there is associated reading with this episode. The one and only Jeff Talanian will be returning to Rollin Bones on August 20th. We are going to be talking about Clark Ashton Smith and his fiction. And specifically, we are going to be talking about, let's see, 8 stories. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know what those stories are so that you can go ahead and read them in advance of our discussion on August 20th. So we will be reading The Devotee of Evil, The Flower Women, The Satyr, Mother of Toads, The Charnel God, The Isle of the Torturers, Tales of Satampra Zeros, and The Seven Geeses. So I will continue to announce those, and we will be talking all about those stories, myself and Jeff Talanian, their significance in role playing, and why Clark Ashton Smith has flown under the radar as one of the more underrated appendix and authors. So I'm looking forward to that. Hope you guys are looking forward to that. Malachi, there will not be another month off from me anytime soon. So until next time, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you guys rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see you guys next time.